Alright YouTube, what is happening? We got another Wee knife, I know, on the table today, and this is another one from our pass around group. This is the Arrakis, I believe is how you say it. It's got to be how you say it, Arrakis. This is an Eliza Isham design. Again, you can definitely tell. If I put that on the table these days and you said who designed that knife, I bet 9 out of 10 people would get that right. If you're into knives, you're going to say that's definitely an Eliza Isham design. It's super out there, weird, futuristic, and that's just kind of his thing, and that's cool, you know? It's different. It adds some spice, some variety to the knife world. Let's go over the basic specs on this guy first. Its overall length is 8 inches, with a blade of 3.5 inches. Your cutting edge is about 3 3/4 essentially. Blade thickness doesn't really matter. 0.15 if you really care about that. Below M390 blade still. That was not what I would call Wharncliffe blade, but that's what listed as. That's strange. We wouldn't call that Wharncliffe. It does have a flat grind. Pretty shallow grind, not very tall, because of this crazy stuff going on here, so keep that in consideration. Your handle thickness is 0.5 inches, 0.57, just a hair over a ½ inch, which is pretty standard. And the handle length is 4.5, so it's actually a pretty good size. I like this kind of size of knife. And it weighs 3.76 ounces. Now this is the titanium with like the gold or bronze accents. You can get it carbon fiber, bunch of different variations, two-tone blades, etc. This is kind of your standard satin, pretty high, almost a polished satin blade. So there we go. There's the knife closed. Let's do some size comparisons. Open. I'm only bringing this one in because I got it at the same time, and we're going to talk about a little bit about this in the video. As far as the pass around, these came in around the same time. Spyderco Shaman. And then here is the Spidey Chef for size comparison. So it's a little bit smaller than both those knives. And how about a small Wilson Combat Sabenza? My favorite variation of the Sabenza right there. So small Sabenza. So there's some size comparisons for you. All right. So let's talk about these two knives real quick. Just get this out of the way now. Start off the video. I got these both at the same time, and they're both very different, completely different knives, right? Like one is, you know, a pretty plain Jane with G10 handle scales. You know, pretty normal blade shape there with the Spidey hold opener, right? Pretty much your typical Spyderco compression lock, everyday carry user knife, right? Then you've got the Arrakis, which is very futuristic, very not designed for use. And I'm going to say that, don't take that personally, fanboys, but this knife is really not designed to be, I mean, you can obviously use this for light tasks, but for harder, for just using the knife, I find the handle to be very uncomfortable. This is, we'll just jump straight into our ergonomics. It's just got too many sharp angles. This right here is definitely a sharp angle at the back. It gets you in your hand right here, right in the meat of your hand. It kind of pokes you a little bit. It almost feels like the handle should be a little bit longer on this in this instance. I do find if I choke up, it's better, but that's not really a full choil. It is there, but it's not a very safe choil. I mean, your finger could easily slip on the edge. So, and you kind of have to use this, and this thumb wrap works well. So if you want to get in and do some fine cuts, but I mean, I'm telling you, like this, I just look at a knife like this and I say, this knife was not really meant to be used. It was meant to be looked at. It's more of a showpiece, you know, safe queen, we'll call it. I got these both at the same time, and I literally have not, and I'm going to be honest with you guys, have not done much at all with this knife. I've looked at it, I've flipped it, I've handled it, I've done some light cutting with it. And that light cutting was enough for me to, excuse me, was enough for me to know that this is not meant to be like really used knife. It's more of just like a artsy showpiece knife, right? And it's beautiful. Don't get me wrong. Super cool looking. Futuristic, but practical, not at all. Not really. Not to me anyway. One thing that really gets me on this guy is this. So this blade cutout looks really cool, right? But it's actually very sharp right through here. They didn't do a very good job of, I mean, you can easily get your fingers in there, and it's almost going to, it won't cut you, but it's really close. I mean, it's pretty sharp in there. I get that's just for aesthetics, because there's really no other reason to have those on there. You can't use it to open the knife when you shut the knife. You can't like get in there and use that to flick it or anything. It's only meant to be a flipper, which it flips really well. It's got good action, which you expect. But it's just, yeah, this is the only way I could possibly use this knife. I don't like thinking I don't want to have to choke up on this every time, and then my thumb's my finger's right there by the blade. I'm like, because back here it's just uncomfortable and feels weird. It's just got weird ergonomics. So ergonomically, not what I would consider to be a useful knife. That's just my opinion. It may not be very popular with this kind of knife because, you know, but for me, it's like I'm going to pick this Spyderco. I'm just using this as an example. I could use one of these other knives I brought in earlier as just as a knife. I would pick 10 times out of 10. I'd pick up this Shaman and say, yep, I'm going to carry that one today. Why? It's not as flashy, but it works really well. It's a really good user knife. This is like, I'm not going to use that. I'm just going to have this in a display case, or I'm going to put it in my safe and look at it and flip it every once in a while. I mean, it's not really, you know, designed to be a user knife, in my opinion. And maybe that's what his intention was. Maybe it was just to be futuristic and put one of his designs out there, and we thought it was cool, and like, hey, we'll develop it for you, you know? It'll sell. It's $330. I mean, it's not cheap. It's got high-end materials, but you're going to pay $330 for a knife that you're never going to touch and use. I mean, this is an expensive knife, but guess what? I carry it and use it all the time. In fact, it's even more expensive than that knife. But it's meant to be used. It's a tool, you know. It's what knives are for, right? And I use it all the time. Same with the Spidey Chef, Shaman, you know. This is not one I would pick up and use. So it's just kind of a weird knife to me. Yeah, aesthetically, like, it's cool looking and futuristic and stuff. I get that. It has a nice action, but the ergonomics are not good for using. I'm curious how well it even will cut. I mean, I've like cut like small things with it. See how thick it is behind the edge. Let's get this measurement right. Mr. Nero Knives taught us how to measure. Wow, it's actually super thin behind the edge. Well, that's kind of cool. 0.0175, so about 17 thousandths behind the edge. That is pretty thin, so it actually will slice pretty well. Yeah, I'm getting that same reading everywhere. So it's actually a pretty slicey blade. So for having it's pretty shallow. I mean, it doesn't have a very tall grind, but it's pretty slicey. So that's too bad. Honestly, that is too bad. Like, I think about the Bishop that I just reviewed, which is a perfect user knife, but it has a thick edge and it didn't cut very well. This one has a really thin edge and it's super uncomfortable to use. So what the heck? I don't know. That's just funny to me. Like, really? What are you doing? I mean, that's way thinner behind the edge than the Spyderco. Way thinner. That's like, well, let's find out. I think it's 25 thousandths, but it could be more. Now, it's obviously designed to be a little bit harder use blade, but what's the heck's going on with my calipers? There we go. Yeah, the Shaman's about 0.027. So it's definitely a lot thicker behind the edge. But guess what? I'm going to pick this one up every time, even though I wish it was thinner. I wish it was that thin behind the edge. That would be like perfect. Big, hard-to-use knife that's that thin behind the edge. Sign me up. This is, yeah, it's thin and it'll slice, but you're not going to want to use it for very long because it's just not really meant to be. That's really too bad that they made this grind so slicey and thin on this knife. It's like kind of wasted. Sorry. Pocket clip. Pretty nice. I mean, it goes well with the flow of the knife if we're looking at purely a design element, but you can tell by the way this review is going, I'm not into the design necessarily anyway, so, but it'll function fine. It's good. It's pretty deep too. If you're actually going to carry and use this knife, which I don't think a lot of people that buy this would, but if you do, more props to you. Yeah, it's a pretty decent carry, so. Overall, I mean, it's a very unique design, which is pretty much sums up Elijah Isham. But he does have some pretty good user designs. Look at the Civivi knives he just brought out; those are pretty good to be used knives. It's just kind of, I guess, if you can get around the handle and it doesn't bother you, and you know, it's pretty slicey. It would definitely cut. You know, it definitely cut things pretty well. I guess if you just kind of choked up on the knife like this and used it like this all the time, you'd probably be okay. You'd probably be good to go. And the other thing about these blade holes, though, is that they took away so much of the grind, or of the cutting, you know, yeah, the grind, that's the right way to say it. And so it's going to be very shallow, and then things are going to get caught in here, man. If you use this for anything, food, anything like that, you're going to get crap caught in these holes. So just not a very practical user design, but, you know, maybe it wasn't intended to be that way, and I shouldn't review it that way. Because from a design aspect, if you're just saying, you know, that's a design knife, it's beautiful, and it's really well done, and it looks super cool, right? It's futuristic and awesome and stuff, but as an actual, like, knife to be used, I mean, no one really uses their knife like this, by the way. It's funny when we do these reverse grips, and I'm like, when I stab stuff, I mean, no one really does that, so I don't, anyway. From that kind of standpoint, design-wise, it definitely has awesome lines, and it's just out there, different. And from a manufacturing standpoint, it's awesome. We did a fantastic job. This is not an easy knife to make. This is not something that would be like, hey, let's just throw this together. This is going to take a serious amount of milling and design, and manufacturing, and just really precision cuts and, you know, precision milling. I'm sure it's all done by machine, but still very hard to execute this knife. It's got a two-piece frame here, attaches here at the screws there, and then the pivot. I mean, design-wise, very difficult and out there, right? And in the hand, it looks really cool, but again, just not really made to be used. But you know what? Not all knives are. Not a lot of guys collect knives. I don't find myself to be a collector. I call myself an enthusiast. I have a lot of knives, but I use all of my knives. There's not one that doesn't get used on a daily basis. And for me, if I were to go buy this, I would never use it. It would just sit there and look pretty, and then it would get sold. So, alright guys, thanks for watching my video on the Knives Arrakis. I know it's a little different review maybe, but just that's how I feel about it. So, talk to you next time.